Happy Friday, ladies and gentlemen. It's another week behind us. Welcome to the Rational Standard. I am Martin van Staden. Light panel again this week. Our colleagues Zakele Mtembu and David and Sarah are still not with us. I promise you that this is meant to be a panel show, so don't get used to it just being me and Morné. But yeah, without further ado, I'm joined as always by Dr. Morné Malan. And I think maybe Morné, this is the first time, maybe the second time, but it's to me it almost feels like the first time that the week before hasn't been completely insane and crazy. Lots of things are happening still, but I think the pace of it is slowing down, and I'm all for that.
I think we're just getting used to it. I think we've just
That could be it.
Our level of tolerance for madness is just gotten much higher. So it's equally crazy, but we've just gotten used to it. I guess we've just
Yes.
It's not even moving the dial anymore. Things that used to sound like insane end of the world kind of things now feels just another Wednesday, I guess.
And it's a trial by fire. I think we quickly adapted to it, and I think it's a very bad thing because the very important big things are happening, and we as society are meant to see it, understand it, internalize it, respond to it within sometimes minutes, usually just a few days, whereas kind of previously you had at least weeks, months, and years on some occasions. But those days be over. And I mean the thing that happened this week that has forced us to do this again is, of course, kind of part of what we've discussed before, but now a new dimension to it, of course. And that is that our friends from Afriforum and Solidarity, who just returned, I think, this morning, Friday, the 7th of March, from the United States, they have been charged with treason. I don't actually know how it works, whether this is only a complaint that has been made and they haven't been formally charged. I'm not sure. But however, whatever the case is, MK, the Mkhonto we Sizwe party, and others, we aren't being given details on who else it is, have laid a complaint of high treason against the Hawks say an organization, and then the Hawks later say individuals. So who knows? Essentially against Afriforum and Solidarity. The delegation that they had in the US now was Flip Base, chairman of the Solidarity Movement, Jaco Kleinans, international liaison for the Solidarity Movement, Kali Kriel, CEO of Afriforum, which is a key affiliate of the Solidarity Movement, and Dirk Arman, CEO of the Solidarity Trade Union, which is the core of the movement. So the four of them kind of went to the US and shared information, especially their Washington Memorandum, which we discussed in last week's episode, with the American government. And I mean, I think we might have some disagreements about emphasis and about detail here and there, but ultimately, basically, all factual, all kind of basically correct. But they have been now accused of having spread misinformation that undermines let me find the language here.
The sovereignty?
It is something along the lines of undermining the sovereignty and interests of the. Here it is. Accusing Afriforum and Solidarity of lobbying foreign powers to act against the sovereignty and economic interests of South Africa. And I read another quote elsewhere that this is primarily about misleading the American government about the land issue and about the Expropriation Act. So that's kind of broadly what this is about. Now we have kind of civil society leaders being kind of looked into for high treason, the Hawks, the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation. They've said they're taking this very seriously. The Minister of Police has said that he's taking it very seriously, and they're working with the NPA to look into the charges. None of that is good. They should have always said, listen, this is nonsense. So, Morné, I don't know, what do you make of this kind of as an initial thought?
Yeah, I think initially there's at least 3 points that I think are stand out to me. The first one is the question, and I think you sort of already answered it, is whether or not there's actually misinformation being spread. Again, I'm not entirely sure what the difference is between misinformation and disinformation. I'm sure that there is a technical distinction between those two, although I've never actually heard one of the two get used in isolation. It's almost always mis and disinformation, never just misinformation or just disinformation. It's always got to be both. It's almost like high treason. I've never heard somebody talk about low treason or medium treason or
just treason.
Creep. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what qualifies as high treason as opposed to just regular old treason, run-of-the-mill treason. But so the first question is whether or not there is actually misinformation being spread. The second one is whether or not that actually qualifies as treason. And surely not. Surely you can't be in a situation where just because you disagree on the facts of a matter that spreading that information is inherently treasonous.
No. Even if it's not just disagreement, even if they're literally just lying, like it's all lies, like they're telling a big hot potato of a lie, even that cannot be treason. I mean, believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, you're free to lie. Lying is a basic human liberty. I mean, it's very dishonest, it's very unethical, but you are allowed to lie. So yeah, I mean, I interrupted you there, but it's certainly not treason.
Yeah, but okay, in the case of lying, I mean, you're free to lie, but that's not to say that there won't be any consequences associated with lying.
It might be fraud, something like that, a civil case, maybe criminal fraud, very unlikely, but it's not treason. It's not a crime against the state to lie. The state does not take an interest in you lying unless you're under oath in court or something like that. So
yeah, no, definitely. And the last point is just the fact that these are mainly political parties, almost exclusively political parties that have laid these complaints. And I think that's just also because I've seen a lot of people have been, coming to the defense because they realize how bad it looks. They realize that, here's a group of people that say they're being oppressed. They go to the US, they go to a foreign nation and say, oh, geez, we feel as though we're being oppressed. And then the answer to that is the government basically investigates them for treason. And the reason why I think it's important to emphasize that it's political parties that are doing this is because, that's the official opposition. MK are the largest non-GNU partner. They have 15% they received 15% of the vote. They do have a similar amount of representation in the National Assembly. So to me, to say that, no, it's not the government, it's other political parties. No, the GNU is not the only government in South Africa. Government consists of a legislature, of an executive, and of a judicial system. And those are representatives of the South African legislature. Those are parliamentarians. So this is the South African Parliament or representatives of the South African Parliament that have laid a complaint of treason against its citizens. And that's significant. I mean, that really does matter. That's not something that you can just sweep away and say, no, it doesn't matter because it's not a party in the GNU itself.
Yeah, it's not the executive.
Yeah, exactly. We do have separation of powers in South Africa. I don't think it actually functions as well as it should all the time, but there are separate powers in South Africa. And actually, comparatively speaking, our executive isn't as strong as it is, or as muscular as it is in many other countries. Parliament, at least on paper, has quite a bit more authority than it does than the legislature does in many other countries. And likewise with the executive, they're relatively less. But I think that's just another point: is that this is, it's not at all illegitimate to say that this is the government investigating citizens, and the reason why they're doing that is because these citizens feel as though they're being targeted. And again, it's not that they're really saying, you're wrong on X, Y, and Z. They're just saying that, it's like you always say, it's more that we don't like the vibes with which you're presenting these facts, and therefore it's incorrect. we don't like what that says about us. So it puts us in a bad light. So we're just going to say it's not right, because it's treason to put us in a bad light, basically.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean it's even worse. I mean, you're completely right that if parliamentarians, I mean, these people live because the taxpayer pays their salaries. If that didn't happen, they would be starving on the streets. They have no other skills. So they are receivers of tax revenue. They are formal representatives of parliament. They are MPs. They are part of the government. If you say they're not, then kind of parliamentary democracy comes to an end. So these people are part of the government. You're completely right about that. But even worse than that, and I alluded to this earlier, is that whereas in let's say a normal society, let's even say Germany, and let's say these charges were made against the AfD. The German government does not like the AfD, but it is very likely, I think, and I'm pretty sure of this, that the Minister of Justice in Germany and the Commissioner of Police in Germany and the head of their kind of specialized counter crime unit or whatever would say, yeah, please don't waste our time by coming to us and charging these people that you don't like with treason. We are monitoring them. We are the government. We check into these people. So if they've committed treason, rest assured that we will take care of it. But please do not waste our time with this nonsense. And that is healthy and that is normal. And everyone on Twitter and even News24 with their new fact-checking desk or whatever have said that, but the Hawks are under a constitutional obligation to investigate any crime that is kind of reported to them. And I mean, this is kind of an example of taking a grain of truth and kind of wrapping it in this blanket of lies. And it's like, yes, okay, formally there does exist such an obligation. I'm not sure it rises to a constitutional obligation, but maybe there's a legal obligation to do so. But to deny that police officers and detectives and inspectors and these kind of generals and colonels and so on they lack any kind of discretion to kind of say, listen, you have now brought me something that is on its face prima facie kind of nonsense. You are basically saying that Santa Claus stole your pixie dust and you want me to investigate it. It's like the answer is no. I have opened a case and I have immediately closed the case because this is a frivolous waste of my time as a kind of colonel in the Hawks. And certainly this should be the kind of approach of the National Prosecuting Authority, is to simply say no. And they didn't say no. So it's worse than just MPs bringing the charges. Our government is entertaining it. The executive is entertaining it. The charges were accepted by the Hawks. The minister, the whole Minister of Police has said that they're looking into this and that they're taking it seriously. And they're saying that they're already working with the National Prosecuting Authority to investigate the charges. So that to me blows out of the water any kind of a notion that no, it's MK and they're just kind of, it's a stunt. So yeah, it's fine. The government isn't really involved. It's like, no, the government, the executive government is very involved now. They've had many opportunities this week to say, listen, they filed it. We told them to go away. We opened the case. We closed it immediately. They didn't do that. They did not do that. So I think
and we've issued a fine for wasting our time and resources, because that is relaying a illegitimate complaint. It's not only can they refuse to investigate, they can also levy a fine and say that this is a false complaint, or you're wasting our time and our resources. So it's much more than just they have a discretion to investigate, and also a discretion as to when they investigate, because obviously they have to prioritize certain cases above others. But they can also say that this is, on the face of it, not a legitimate complaint. Not only are we not going to investigate, we are actually going to force you to pay a nominal amount in order to compensate for our time.
Yeah. And I think in some jurisdictions, I hope in South Africa, but in some jurisdictions at least, it is illegal to falsely report a crime. Like, I mean, the prototypical example is false accusations of rape. When someone accuses someone else of having raped them, and then a year or two into the case, they say, "Oh no, actually, I had some grievance against this person, and it was all made up." I think that is illegal in many jurisdictions, and I think rightly so, because as I said in my Daily Friend column this week, it is not. I mean, we have lawfare in this country, which is basically you involve the courts in ordinary political kind of engagement. It's kind of part of the democratic furniture now, which I think is to some degree true. Accusing someone of a crime is not that. Accusing someone of a crime is not just another tool that you have as a political actor to kind of drive your message, like you have the press media where you can do interviews. You have the parliamentary chamber where you can do speeches. You have kind of stadiums where you can do rallies. Oh, and you have the police station where you can accuse people of crime. That is not part of
the
it.
Sixth column.
Yes, it's like this additional platform. No, it's not that. Because what is it? What is happening when you accuse someone of a crime? Cut away the formalism. You are going to people with guns. They all have guns, and you are telling them, "I want you and your gun to go and detain this person by force, and then ultimately I want you to keep that person by force in a cage, locked up. And if they resist you, I want you to shoot them and kill them." That is what you are doing when you accuse someone of a crime. And rightly so, if you accuse someone of murder or kind of theft or robbery and trespassing and hijacking, that you should be able to do that. But if you just kind of do it willy-nilly as a part of your kind of political plan, like if MK sat around their office, you're like, what are we going to do this year to kind of campaign for our election in 2029? Okay, so yes, we can do this rally and this rally. Oh, and we're going to accuse these people of kind of committing high treason. It's like, no, that you don't get to do that. And if you do that and it doesn't stick and it's not a real kind of accusation, then I think you should go to jail as the person who laid that complaint. I think if it's not already a crime, it should be a crime to falsely accuse someone of committing certainly a serious offense, the most serious offense that is recognized by our law, which is high treason. So there have to be repercussions. There have to be, at least, as you said, Morné, a fine for wasting the police's time. I think that's the very least that can happen. But at most, I think my preference, even as a liberal who I care about free speech, I don't think this has anything to do with freedom of speech. You are actively lobbying for violence to be committed against peaceful people, and there should be consequences for that, for MK and whoever else is joining them in this crusade.
Yeah, definitely. And well, I think actually, seeing as we are in South Africa, and if treason is the highest crime, then the second highest one is probably racism. And
yes.
I was actually involved some years ago. Well, not personally, but the organization I worked with was involved in a case of racism. I think it was at the South African Police Service. And there, the facts of the case were that there was two more junior employees who laid a complaint against their line manager. And part of the complaint was that their line manager had acted in racist fashion, used various racist words that I'm sure everybody knows what those will be. And the outcome of that case was that, on the one hand, well, firstly, it was clear that these complaints were all false. But the important element there was that the court found that a false accusation of racism is to be treated as equivalent to an act of racism. In other words, if you're falsely accusing someone of racist activity, and it's clearly you've clearly acted with malice, and it's quite clear that that the case has no prospects of success, the facts aren't in your favor, then you yourself will be treated as having acted in a racist fashion. And if you were to use that as an analogy to treason, then the implications there are quite clear. If you're maliciously accusing people of treason when it's quite clear that treason is not occurring, which I think we all agree on, let's be honest. Then there should be some consequences for you. Like you said, at the very least, a fine. And I mean, to me, it wouldn't be at all unreasonable to say that acting in this way, having falsely accusing people of treason, undermines the legitimacy of our government. It undermines the legitimacy of our constitutional democracy. If we have political parties running around accusing citizens of treason all the time, that is dangerous to the state. And to me, that's not at all. It's not at all unreasonable to say that we don't want to encourage this. In fact, we do want to put up incentives that really disincentivize people from doing these sorts of things, and therefore we are going to treat it as akin to treason in and of itself.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes perfect sense, because this is an attack on democracy. I mean, because if someone is so democracy means that if you oppose the government, you are allowed to say that, and you are allowed to do something about it. That is kind of the quintessence of democracy. In a dictatorship, you're not allowed to say or disagree with the government, and you're not allowed to do anything about it. In a democracy, you are. So what did Afriforum and Solidarity do? What does organizations like the Free Market Foundation and the IRR do? We disagree with the government, we say we do, and we do something about it. Afriforum and Solidarity have been lobbying this government and previous administrations for decades to refrain from committing harms against the vital interests of their members in their constituency. At virtually every corner, the government has said, go away, we don't want to speak to you. Now, they've litigated, and the courts have sometimes come to their aid, and oftentimes have said, go away, we don't want to speak to you. So is the answer then, okay, democracy now stops, it ends? No. You are allowed to bring pressure to bear on the state through various means. The EFF and the trade unions, they do that through protests, where they burn cars, they sometimes kill people, and they block roads and so on. That's one form of pressure that is democratically wielded. Another one is that gay rights groups and environmentalist groups go to the UN and they say, look at how bad the South African government is performing on these metrics, on cutting climate emissions and kind of protecting the rights of homosexual South Africans. Please, can you look into this and kind of issue a report or kind of adopt a resolution? And they do that with foreign governments as well. And that's what Solidarity and Afriforum did. They said, okay, we are going to the United States with facts. I mean, we still wait with bated breath for the misinformation to be pointed out. We're going to the United States, and we're going to ask them to put pressure on the South African government to change its ways. And while we ask them, we are going to plead with them to not harm the country and its citizens. We're going to plead for AGOA to stay. We're going to plead for PEPFAR and so on to stay as far as we can. But we want pressure to be put on the South African government. This is a normal part of democracy. You are allowed to put pressure on the government to change what it's doing. The ANC itself did this for decades against the apartheid government. Other groups have done this in the democratic era continuously and relentlessly. Marius Ruud from the IRR recently shared a screen grab from the EFF's constitution, their kind of organizational constitution, which says that one of the purposes of the EFF is to change government, the government in South Africa by any means necessary. And it's like, so that is treason. That is treason. But no, they're not charged for treason. The Julius Malema sat in court, in open court. It was recorded. He said that when the time comes, they'll blow up the union buildings. They will use violence to prosecute the revolution in South Africa. That's not treason, apparently. But going to the US, sharing facts, saying, please don't punish the citizens for the bad behavior of the ANC government. And if you want to sanction, please sanction only politicians. Somehow that's treason, and the Minister of Police is taking it very seriously and looking into it.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, Martin. Just the fact that they weren't just complaining; they were also saying, "Please, we also want to argue and lobby on behalf of certain of South Africans who stand to lose something if AGOA is lost or if sanctions are imposed or stuff like that." I mean, geez, how do you? They've actually not only indicated what the problems are, they've also basically stepped in and advocated for the interests of various, of all South Africans, really, and not just in a negative sense, as in stop X, Y, and Z, but also in a positive sense, as in please keep X, Y, and Z in place from your side. And if you do want to act, rather do this than do that. So, I mean, it's just such a clear-cut case to me. I'm not even sure why anybody is having this debate.
Well, no, I mean, for me, the key worry here is that I think it's clear that if there is going to be a case, firstly, the prosecutor who takes the case must be disbarred, number one. But if there is such a case, Solidarity will win. They'll win that case. I think any halfway decent judge will spend a day in court and he will say, listen, you're wasting my time. We have a backlog in this court. We can't be playing this game anymore. Take it away. I think that is more or less what would happen. But the problem is the potential chilling effect. Now, I don't understand why civilians are able to charge people with treason. I think it's good that kind of people are allowed to lay complaints themselves. They don't have to go through kind of the NPA whenever there's a crime that's been committed. But when it comes to, let's say, sedition and treason and the crimes against the state, I would say there is a fair argument to be made that only the state should be able to charge people with that, like the executive, the specialized anti-treason units, so the kind of counter-terrorist units, the Hawks, the NPA, the what do they call it, IPID, and so on. They are the ones that if they've now have reason to believe that treason has been committed or sedition, they need to be the ones to go and take that to court, because then there's a limiting effect. There's a limiting principle, which is to say that this person has sworn allegiance to the Constitution. They nominally, theoretically, they buy into the values of constitutional democracy, and they take their calling, their profession as a police officer, as a servant of the people seriously. So they will not just willy-nilly accuse people of treason, which is in fact the case in South Africa. I think the Boeramag was the last kind of case of high treason that's been kind of prosecuted in South Africa, and that's decades ago. So it's not like the South African government is just accusing people left, right, and center of treason. So it does seem to take that somewhat seriously. But now we have the situation where anyone can accuse anyone of high treason, the capital crime amongst capital crimes. And you have to, if we take this logic of there's a constitutional responsibility for it to be investigated, you as the accused, there's some responsibility now and expectation that you are going to have to defend yourself. I mean, I guess you could say, well, I don't care. I'm going to go and sip a cool drink beside the pool. I think most reasonable people will be like, okay, I at least have to go speak to a lawyer. I need to kind of see where this is going to go and so on. And already the money is starting.
Reasonable or treasonable people? I didn't quite get
treasonable people, yes. And already the money is starting to tick. So I have no doubt that what has happened so far is going to cost Solidarity some money. It's going to cost Afriforum some money. I think anyone who is accused of treason and they hear, okay, the police are taking it very seriously, already you're speaking to lawyers. Now, in South Africa, as in most of the Western world, a criminal defense lawyer is a very expensive creature. It's not a cheap person to speak to. And most kind of defense attorneys in South Africa are legal aid. I mean, it's shocking, because the private criminal defense is basically unaffordable to everyone except the absolute creme de la creme of elite in this country. And to top it off, if you win, if you're acquitted in a criminal trial, like high treason is, you are not entitled to a cost order. If you win in a civil case, you're entitled to a cost order. Your opponent who lost must pay sometimes at least some of what the costs are that you incurred in your defense. But in criminal cases, no, not 1 cent. You get nothing. You just get to not go to jail, and that means you've spent 3, 4, 5 million rand, even more, for a legal team to defend you against the most kind of ridiculous charges of treason. And what does that produce? It must produce a chilling effect. It must produce a chilling effect. It must cause people who are accused of treason to in the future then be like, okay, well, geez, we did win the case, thank goodness, but we can't keep doing this. So we have to now mute ourselves a little bit. We have to not do that again. That might trigger some people to accuse us of high treason. Now, you can't have that. You can't have a democracy that works that way. I mean, the Singaporeans do it that way, and I think that's a bad thing, to kind of just browbeat your opponents with litigation, and they just can't afford to defend against you anymore. I think that's an attack on democracy. So, I agree with you that it's obvious that this case is not going to stick. It's clear. But the fact that it is happening in itself is a massive indictment against the processes and the kind of complaints procedure and so on that we have in this country, and it needs to be looked at.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, beyond the fact of who lays the complaint, I think there's also a question as to, investigation of these sorts of things. Obviously, they do need to be investigated. But to me, treason is almost, if it's not so clear cut, it's one of those things where if you have to ask, if you have to check, it's probably not. If you're not sure whether or not this is treason, then it probably isn't treason.
Yes.
Treason should be something that's it's such a clear binary where no, yes, that that it should hardly warrant any investigation. It should be fairly clear, prima facie, this is, yes it is, or yes it isn't, and it is okay. It is, to me at least, it should be very obvious that there has to be some sort of, not that I'm saying this should guide policy or that there should be some sort of referendum or something, but if it's not something that basically the entire population agrees about, or a large percentage of the population agrees about, then surely you can't have it. You can't just implement it. To me, it's almost at the same level of changing the constitution sort of thing, where you should have like, 2/3 of parliament or something like that. There has to be such broad agreement on the facts of the matter and on the interpretation of the facts of the matter that that it can't be denied. And this is just so far. We're so far removed from that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I see the people in the chat are already trying to get us arrested. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, it's just another Friday.
No. So, what's that thing that I think it was a Twitch thing where they were swatting people. I think was it called swatting?
Yes.
Where they called in basically the SWAT team if you were busy losing a Call of Duty against some Twitch streamer or something.
Yes. Because they want to be they want it to be recorded because they're streaming. And I mean, that's a good example because that's illegal. That's very illegal. If you're guilty of swatting, I think they throw the book at you in the US. So, I mean, rightly so. Because they recognize that this is not just the police checking up on you. Like Officer Bob, he lives down the road. He's coming to knock on the door and he's like, hey, are you okay? What's happening in here? No. You are endangering this person's life by calling the police. I mean, they recognize the nature of confrontation between civilians and the law enforcement and armed services. It's not just a kind of routine kind of part of normal social interaction. And that's what I worry. That's what I worry about this is becoming. A lot of people say that, we shouldn't do lawfare in general because you don't want the courts involved in democracy. I disagree with that. I think the courts play an important democratic role. I think you should litigate against the state. I think you should litigate against your opponents to kind of secure the liberties and structures and so on that the Constitution requires. I think lawfare is a good thing, but that is not this. When you go and you say, let's use the armed services against our opponents, just as a matter of routine political kind of engagement, it's like, oh, we want to score some media points, let's lay a charge of treason. You cannot do that. You cannot do that, and you should not do that. And if you do it, you should go to prison. So, the Americans, at least to some degree, I think, understand this.
Definitely. And I see there is. There's two comments here from Lana, and maybe you know more about this than I do. I know something about it, but not that much. But its first comment is Russian opposition lobbied and pushed for Magnitsky Act in USA Congress 10 years ago. I think that was it 2012? I think it might have been earlier.
2012, signed into law.
By Obama, wasn't it?
Yes.
The Magnitsky Act. So that's the one thing. And then she said, the second question is, can USA use it against SA politicians, especially those accused in Zondo Commission? Which I have seen other people suggest as well, is if you are going to target people, target those that have been explicitly implicated in the Zondo report. So the Magnitsky Act, as far as I can recall, and I'm not sure how much you know about it, that was basically targeted sanctions, as far as I know.
Okay.
Targeting Russian officials and Russian oligarchs. And
for the death.
I mean, that's of Magnitsky, right? Magnitsky.
Yeah, it seems like it. I've never heard of it, but I'm just reading a summary now, and that seems to be kind of someone was killed in a Moscow prison, and this act was kind of adopted to punish those Russian officials of something that happened outside of American borders. So yeah, I mean, the general flow of that seems to be more or less kind of sanctions. I don't know if they asked for more than sanctions, but I think that's fair enough. I mean, that's what I've kind of always felt is the appropriate way to punish foreign actors without military intervention, for instance, is you identify those behind the condemnable conduct, and you just tell them, listen, you don't get to come and do shopping in Rodeo Boulevard in Hollywood anymore. You are now banned from this country, and you don't get to benefit from various US services and so on. We will instruct our government and so on to not render any services to you as an individual, and I think that's appropriate. I think that was done in Zimbabwe as well, and lots of people want to say, that's the reason why Zimbabwe collapsed, is because of targeted sanctions against politicians. It's like, well, that's a very tall order argument to kind of defend, but yeah, it's I think it's appropriate, and I think that is more or less what Solidarity and Afriforum were getting at, is to say that the Zondo Commission identified the corrupt in South Africa's government and political circles, and that's a good place to start. If you want to kind of punish South Africa or the South African government for what it's been doing, I think there's probably some people not on that list who probably should be on some kind of list to also punish, especially people on the opposition, on the nominal opposition benches. Julius Malema yesterday, I think Thursday, was at Parliament, or at the Cape Town City Hall, where Parliament is now based for some reason. He said, I mean, in one breath, he said that, these Afriforum people, they're spreading misinformation in the US about us. And then he went over to say that we will expropriate white people's land, whether they like it or not. It's like, well, okay, so what's the...
Without compensation.
Without compensation. It's like, so what's the misinformation? That's Afriforum and Solidarity agree with you, Julius. You're agreeing. Why are you saying that it's misinformation now? So I would say
that's what I'm saying. It's misinformation vibes. It's just the case of you're going to the rest of the world and you're making it sound like this beautiful thing is not the greatest thing ever, and that's misinformation. Yes. We're not going to disagree on the facts. We're just disagreeing on how you're supposed to feel about the facts. You should feel far better about it than you actually are. And,
it's bizarre because Ernst Roots was on Renato Gos's show yesterday, and he also he was like, he's pleading with people now to just tell him where he's wrong. Like, It's like I care a lot about being credible and being accurate. So my goodness, just show me. And a lot of us have taken this perspective, and I think as some people know, I kind of run the IRR's race law thing, and that's the closest really that people are coming to pointing to real misinformation, and they're like, there isn't 142 race laws in South Africa. That's the misinformation. That's where you're wrong. And I'm like, okay, cool. So now at least we know what dispute is about. Okay, so let's now see about these race laws. And it comes down to exactly what you said. It's like you point to, let's say, the National Weather Act. They're like, of course, this cannot be a race law. The Weather Act. Are you serious? The Weather Act, a race law. And I'm like, okay, cool. So let's look at the Weather Act. Okay, section.
It says there's Jewish space lasers affecting
and it's like you look at the Weather Act, and the Weather Act says that the National Weather Board must be demographically representative of South Africa, racially and sexually representative of the demographics of South Africa. And it's like, cool, there's your race provisions. And they're like, no, but that's a good thing. Of course we want representation in South Africa. How can you say representation is a bad thing? And it's like, I'm not saying representation is a bad thing. I'm saying it's a race law. So it's a race law, and therefore there's no misinformation. We can have the discussion about whether it's a good or a bad thing, but the point is it's a race law. And yeah, it's vibes. It's good
well,
vibes.
But it's also a concession on their point. It's because they know that the calling this and labeling it as a race law is inherently bad. I mean, that sounds bad. It's not nice. That's why they've got this thing where they say a race law is bad, but this law is good. So therefore, these two cannot be the same thing. As though good and race are somehow related to one another, and that's why they want to say that it can't be a race law because I don't like race laws, but also it's essential that we have race laws because that would be good.
Yeah.
I think I figured it out. That makes sense.
It's exactly that. So yesterday, a guy called Kevin Minofu published an article in Daily Maverick. He is, I'm reading his bio. He is a South African legal academic based at Columbia University in New York. He is a postdoctoral research scholar in Columbia Law School Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies. Listen, that kind of tells me everything I need to know.
Which side of the debate did he end up coming down, Martin?
Well, geez, I mean, I had to kind of look into it after I read his bio. Now, it's like, so essentially he goes into, there's these reactionary elements in the US kind of trying to get the American government to take action against South Africa. And he even talks here about there's a vital need for more education to be conducted to better educate the public and international community about the goals and limitations of the legislation. Here he's referring to the Expropriation Act and what he calls race-conscious legislation, particularly on social media platforms where misinformation abounds. So what he's saying, and when I read this yesterday, I was like, okay, finally we've discovered where the problem is. Maybe we should just rename it from the Index of Race Law to the Index of Race-Conscious Law, and then maybe we can get past this thing about, it's a good law, but a race law is a bad law. So maybe if it's a race-conscious law, then it can be a good law, and then we can get over this, what I would consider to be a very, very counterproductive red herring of part of the debate, where it's like, no, it's not a race law because the vibes are good. So maybe it's my fault. Maybe I should just not call it race law anymore and just call it race-conscious law. I don't know how that matters. I don't know what difference that makes, but apparently it does. The vibes, I guess, are important.
Call it the anti-racist law index. This is the index of anti-racist laws.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be funny with the Natives Land Act being on the index of anti-racist law.
You should do is have an index where up to 94, this is the number of race laws. And then at 94, that goes down to 0. And then you get this proliferation of anti-racist laws. There we go. That fixes it, right?
Anti-racist, race-conscious law. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
It's
But yeah,
insane. Like,
that's just, it's the same thing with misinformation is information I don't like, and race laws are laws that I don't like, and therefore if I like the law, it's not race law. And at the end of the day, it's all about, how do we feel about it, and then unfortunately it gets tangled into this whole it has to be inherently dangerous, and it has to be inherently a threat to society. It's sort of, we're ramping it up to 10 this whole time, and now that's not working anymore. Maybe it relates to our just higher tolerance for drama in the news, but now it's like, okay, now we have to take it up to the next level. What's even worse than that? Treason. It's treason. If you say things about a law that I think is nice, and you make it sound as though the law is not so nice, we're not here to talk facts. We're here to say that you're committing treason. And yeah, I think that just on that point about the Magnitsky Act, and actually far more than just that, is this is it's just the fact. It's just the fact that this is not unprecedented. It's not as though this is the weirdest thing that's ever happened. No country has ever gone through it. This country has gone through it not so long ago. And so it's not as though, it's some sort of ahistorical, completely out of the box, never before seen kind of strategy. And again, it's not as though that was the first port of call. Just like what you said about the courts getting involved in the political process, or let's say in the legislative process. I'm maybe not as sanguine about it as you are. I don't think that it should be. I don't think it's inherently good for them to get involved, but I do think it might be necessary for the courts to get involved when all other avenues haven't succeeded. You need to have. When it's clear that in the general course of public consultation, or of just input from the citizens on the policies in their country, when that's completely broken down, when there is no real feedback loop between the interests of the public and the decisions of their legislature, then the courts become necessary. Then there's no other alternative. And in the same way, if you've gone through all of that and you've gone through the courts, which in this case those organizations definitely have, then it's not a good thing for other countries to necessarily get involved, but it might be a necessary thing for other countries to get involved when all other avenues have already been pursued, and without any success. And it's a weird thing where, on the one hand, the government wants to signal absolute obstinacy. We refuse to even engage on these matters. And then on the other hand, it's but why don't you just talk to us? Why don't you just engage with us? We're not going to change anything, and we think you're undermining our democracy, and you should probably get shot. But why don't you just talk to us? We're here, man. What's the problem? Why do you want to just get other people involved? That's basically the messaging.
Ramaphosa said that, I think, twice in the last 2 weeks. He said that we can solve these problems ourselves. Why are they going to America? It's like, why? What could be the reason? Yeah.
And that's the first time I've ever heard them complain about something. They just pop off to America. Yeah, they've always been so happy.
And it's I was on a panel discussion about the Expropriation Act yesterday, and kind of one of the points I made was that a healthy society, and then I have America to a large degree in mind here, but I think you see this in other places as well, is that the government wants to build a highway. There is a house in the way of the highway. The owner says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not keen on moving. And in some cases, I'm not saying this happens in all cases, in some cases the government says, well, oh shit, okay, so let's build around the house. Let's build around his property, because we are not a malicious bunch of kind of bastards, to put it bluntly. We build around his property. We don't always, as government, we do not always have to get our way. I think that is a sign of a relatively healthy society. Now, what has happened in South Africa? We have adopted this legislation that says that it is unacceptable, really, it is ultimately unacceptable for the government to not get its way when it seeks to do good things. If the government wants to do a good thing, then everyone must fall out of the way or be kind of crushed under the bulldozer, and that is why the courts are as involved in South Africa in the political process. That is why you have to go to other countries to put pressure on your government, because we are not here dealing with people who have any kind of respect for the office really that they hold. The president is not the king of South Africa. He is not our emperor. The police are not, we are not their servants, they're our servants. The Department of Public Works, which is primarily responsible for expropriation, is not a kind of actor with its own agency that may have its own agenda. It must always do downstream from what the public wants, and respecting all of their liberties and rights. But that is not how it works in South Africa. There is this thing called the ANC, and now others as well, that have a very particular view for how things must be in the country. And if you're not on board with that, then you will be shoved aside, and your vital interests will be crushed. And then people are surprised. Then people complain that no, but we can't involve the courts in all of our issues. Then we can't involve the Americans in our issues. We don't have a choice. We don't have a choice, because this is not a normal government. This is really, it's a regime in that sense. It is something that acts as if it has its own agency, its own interests, that's somehow completely detached from the kind of interests and rights and liberties of the people.
Yeah. It's it makes a complete joke of the notion of a public servant, because I'm not sure if anybody in government, or very few people at least in government, actually sees themselves as serving the public. In fact, I think a lot of them see it as the opposite. I think a lot of people see it as, no, the public is here to serve me. I'm now in charge, and you are all my subjects. Like you said, it's a sort of emperor's view of democracy, or emperor's view of government. It's the Octavian Augustus rules of ruling. That just in the 21st century. But yeah, I think it's quite clear that the complaint itself is ridiculous. The way in which policy is being made, the way in which policy is being implemented, it's all. I don't think people realize how weird it is the way South Africa actually does these sorts of things. I don't think they realize to what extent we are actually an outlier in this regard, where there's just no reasonable expectation, even from the public, that they should have far more control and say over the actions of their quote unquote representatives than they in fact do. It's I've never quite understood it. Whereas it's actually the norm in most other countries that politicians are treated as employees, not as rulers.
Yeah, and there's a good example of this recently. So some of you will know that I'm kind of engaged in a long debate with Pierre de Vos, a constitutional commentator from University of Cape Town, and kind of the article that he wrote initially on his blog was, and it's kind of the third paragraph in, he essentially says that reasonable people can disagree about these laws and but people shouldn't be lying and spreading misinformation. But in a democracy, reasonable people can disagree. And what really kind of caught my my attention in him saying that was basically to say that reasonable people can disagree about how to achieve the imperative of land redistribution in South Africa. And I was like, but okay, so if you read this very quickly, it might just kind of pass you by. But what is happening here? He's basically saying that the policy agenda of the incumbent government and the kind of previous government up to 2024 is basically holy fiat. It has come down from the heavens, and God himself has said that in South Africa there must be land redistribution. The constitution doesn't say this, and the force will disagree with me on this, but it doesn't say that. And but somehow this public policy decision is a national imperative, and to the extent that we're a democracy and you can disagree about public policy, you can only disagree about how we achieve this ostensible imperative. And the people say this about other things as well. For instance, achieving more equitable representation of various race groups in the workforce. Now, the Constitution says nothing about this. It doesn't say that the South African workforce must reflect national demographics. It says that about the civil service. It does not say that about the workforce in the private sector. It doesn't even imply that anywhere. But because this is a partisan manifesto goal of the ANC, which is fine. It's like they're allowed to write their own manifesto. That's cool. Fine. But somehow the manifesto promises of the ANC have been elevated to being basically constitutional requirements in this country. And people like the Vos and many others help in spreading this impression, which obviously we disagree with, and Solidarity disagrees with, and Afriforum disagrees with, and we're like, but listen, wait a minute, it's not as simple as that. We don't think you are correct with this. Yeah,
I think they may even be treating it as more than just merely constitutional obligations. It's almost like a divine obligation. We are compelled to do this. By supernatural powers, it can't not be done. And I think it's an old. I can't recall who it was who explained this, but it was basically a notion in the Soviet Union where they said that if you really want to control speech, the idea isn't to shut down debate. You don't want people to feel as though they're not allowed to debate. You just really hem in the parameters. So you just you'll never say no, please don't debate. You'll say vigorous debate. We want, it's the same as Mao, 1,000 flowers to bloom. We want vigorous and aggressive arguing of ideas, and we'll see which idea wins. Lots of free speech. Just that know that there is a range of options that are legitimate. So in this little circle, say whatever you want. But just know that that's all off limits. But in this circle, we're really going to go at each other, and that's basically where we are now. Is okay. So we agree on the following 50 principles, but so given that, how do we move on? And you see that all through policy in South Africa, and you see that every time somebody comes out with some sort of critique of government policy. And there has been plenty. I don't know if you want to talk about that World Bank report that came out earlier this week as well.
Yeah, it's related.
Yeah, definitely. It's just another international institution that said, look, policy-wise, you're not up to scratch. You're doing a lot of things wrong. And we know you're doing a lot of things wrong because look at the outcomes. And that's, to me, just the ridiculous thing is that we've all sort of agreed. I don't think there's anybody arguing that, no, we think that the economy is going gangbusters. We think we've done beautiful things for unemployment. Nobody's done more for inequality than us. Infrastructure's going, just absolutely brilliantly. Nobody says that. Nobody thinks the economy is doing well. Nobody thinks investment's doing well. Nobody thinks that any of these things are performing well. But for some reason, you just can't get through to anybody. The conclusion is nothing that we're doing is working. Therefore, let's not change anything. And that's what I just can't understand is what would have to happen for people to accept that that these policies have not worked. It's not as though, and sorry, we'll get to the report now, but we've also done lots of work on crafting policy agendas and policy proposals. And one thing that I just always get stuck on is it's not like the alternatives haven't been tried. We have been trying doing it your way for 3 decades now. what would have to happen in order for you to accept that your way of doing it isn't working? It's a, if you just look at it from from the perspective of, if you're conducting like a scientific experiment or something. A lot of people actually said this after that after the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. There was a huge call for a lot of spending from the government in the US, and there were also lots of people that were critical of that spending, saying, no, it's not going to do much to fix unemployment. You should rather do X, Y, Z, cut taxes or whatever the case might be. And they didn't listen. They went forth. They had a fairly huge spending bill for that time, not for today. Today they spend even more. But unemployment went up. And it's the same question where what would have to happen? You say I'm doing X in order to get to Y. You do X, but we get Z. So does that mean no? Does that mean have you accepted that you're wrong on this? No, it just means that we need to do even more. I've forgotten where I am in the alphabet. Even more of whatever it was I'm doing.
So one of the issues of that, especially in South Africa, and I think definitely in America as well to a large degree, is that most people will answer you, what would need to happen is, well, just elect the opposition. Elect someone else. If you vote ANC, you're going to get ANC policy. You're going to get ANC thinking. But to me, the last year has proven that that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And to me, the best illustration of that is two things. One is that in the municipalities and the province, where the DA has been outright elected as the government of that institution since 2009, the DA has adopted ANC procurement policy, word for word, basically, and it wasn't necessary constitutionally.
That's important to emphasize. That is basically a voluntary decision that they've made. It's not something that
the Constitution is clear. The Constitution is clear. An organ of state may do this if it wants. It may have a preferential procurement policy if it wants. And the DA did it. It adopted the kind of national template, and when I say national, I mean ANC template of preferential procurement policy, which is signed kind of procurement points based on the racial composition of a company that's trying to tender for government contracts. So the DA just adopted ANC policy preferences voluntarily. Now that's one.
And this is prior to the GNU, right?
Yes, yeah. So this is something that's been going on since the DA has been in government in municipalities in Cape Town and then in Pretoria and so on. But the other thing, which is less kind of tangible but far more explicit, is the DA leader, John Staden, two things he recently did. The one thing was on the day of the State of the Nation address of Cyril Ramaphosa. So the State of the Nation was a normal State of the Nation. There was nothing new. It was kind of growth ANC kind of State of the Nation stuff that we all know and love. And after that, Staden said, this is basically all the DA kind of. This is the DA's kind of input front and center in this State of the Nation. And we're like, okay, cool. So the DA basically has adopted ANC preferences. And then shortly after that, or it might have been before, but I think it was after, Staden kind of fared out against everyone who is more or less kind of, I would say, neutral and positive about Trump's executive order, who kind of said that, there's attention being focused on this and good, there's international pressure. And Staden was basically saying that there's a land crisis in South Africa. His words, there is a land crisis in South Africa. And that it's not normal that kind of a minority owns the land in this country, and that something obviously has to be done about this. I think he threw the Gini coefficient in there for good measure or something. And it's like, listen, this is ANC public policy preference that you are speaking now, John, because this is not what a market liberal party or politician says. there is no such thing as a land crisis in kind of a certain. I think I asked you this in the previous podcast. It's like, is there do these terms appear in any other country, which all have histories of injustices and kind of land dispossession? Do you see in terminology like land hunger, land crisis? No, it's a South African thing. Why? Because it's an ANC thing. It's a quintessentially ANC talking point, and it shows that even the leader of the biggest opposition kind of party, that I don't know why people still call it that, but if even your biggest, most liberal, most kind of deep blue water distinctions between the ANC and the deal, whatever, if even they buy in wholesale into the ANC's underlying premise of public policy, then your question becomes all the more important, Morné. What would need to happen for us to actually say that the premise is wrong? Because clearly an election is not that. Even if you replace the ANC of the DA, I do not think that they are going to say, great, the logic of BE is out, the logic of land reform is out, and we replace it with a better logic of empowerment and a better logic of land reform. No, they will copy and paste ANC logic. I'm certain of this. And they will just do it better. So, yeah, I mean, your question is absolutely valid. What is it that needs to happen for there to be an actual shift from the policy direction that we're on, and from the premises upon which our whole public policy kind of infrastructure is built?
Yeah, I think you've articulated it very well there. I think that if people are asking themselves, why has the presence of the DA and other former opposition, now junior partners to the GNU, why has their presence not filtered through to policy decisions? I think that's because they have no really strong policy differences. I think that for the most part, they either agree with policy and feel it should be implemented better, or they don't disagree strongly enough that they feel it's worth fighting for. So it's like you said, we're not going to change policy if we've all bought into the various motivations behind the policy, and also, the rejection of any alternative means by which to achieve those policy objectives. Sorry, there's just a bit of noise out there. I'm not sure if you can hear that. Oh, okay. But yeah, and I mean, one of the things is this really, really strong, and I believe really absurd focus on inequality. And it's something which we really have to discuss at some point, maybe now. But just people don't realize that these comparing of averages just simply is inherently faulty. If people want to compare the average white person to the average black person or black African person in South Africa, you'll find a disparity. You'll find that in terms of income, in terms of wealth, there is a significant disparity. But you'll also find that there's, in terms of the average, so remember we're focusing on averages or medians, in terms of the median white person is also 38 years old. That's 10 years older than the median black African in South Africa. I think it's at least 10. It might actually be more. I'm not sure if it's actually 28, 38. I know it's 38, but it might actually be lower than that. But so there's at least a 10-year gap here, comparing median man versus median man, or median person versus median person. So if you actually had a situation where those two people were perfectly equal in terms of their income or in terms of their wealth, that would be weird. That would indicate that there's something wrong. If the average 38-year-old in one group has the same amount of wealth and income as the average 28 or 27-year-old in another group, then that might be indicative of something strange going on in your economy. Likewise, I think there's about a 2 or 3 year gap in schooling in terms of being on average as a median. Again, so if you have someone who's 38 years old with a university degree, and that person is earning the exact same as, and I've got a cat on my lap, that person is earning the exact same as another person who has matric and is 10 years younger than him, that would be weird.
Yeah.
So,
No,
I mean, it's just, and it's something that so few people seem to be actually engaging with, and so few people are actually taking into account when they just, blithely throw around these figures.
Yeah, but I mean, for me, it's even more basic than that, and I think your point is absolutely correct, and that it does tell us something, and that if there is that kind of equality between a much older qualified white person and someone who is just theoretically out of school, and they are equal, then yes, that tells us something is actually not right. But for me, the far more basic thing is that we haven't really established why inequality per se is a problem. And to me, that's a conversation that has to actually be brought to a conclusion before we can just move on to the so-called solution. So, to me, and I in a presentation to the Afrikaanse Akademie vir Wetenskap en Kunst a few years ago, I described inequality as the academization of poverty or of destitution. So that's to say that inequality is something that has been problematized, and poverty is something that's a problem. So you come across poverty, it hits you in the face, it hits you in the nostrils, you immediately understand that something is wrong here and there has to be a solution. Something has to solve this. But inequality, what is inequality? Difference between X and Y. The point I always make is that there is a huge gulf of inequality between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to the tune of billions of American dollars. This is a massive gulf. It is huge. It is huge. But is that a problem? Of course, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. Neither of them think it's a problem. And it doesn't immediately hit you prima facie as a problem requiring a solution. Poverty does. Obviously, anyone who witnesses poverty and anyone who experiences poverty understands that something is wrong that has to be solved. Now, we all experience inequality. Is that something we see as something that needs to be solved? Tokyo Sekwale is one of the richest men in this country. There is a big gulf of inequality between him and probably the richest guy in Nigeria. Does he go to bed at night thinking, my God, this is a problem? Yes, I feel. Well, I doubt it, but maybe. But the point is that inequality is only a problem. It has only arisen to the status of problem, of a social issue that requires addressing, because it has been problematized by, and I'm going to be very specific here, by Marxism. Marxism is the ideology that in ideological history and the history of political thought has focused attention on this perfectly natural, normal phenomenon known as difference. It has said that this is a Moorse problem and that it will lead, the Marxists say, it will lead to social strife. Inequality will lead to an uprising of the poor against the rich, of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. That does not happen anywhere in the world unless the Marxists agitate for it. And this is important. This is key. At no point do the poor, the proletariat, the relatively less rich spontaneously and organically rise up against those who happen to be wealthier relatively. It does not happen anywhere ever. Many uprisings premised on inequality, and they all happen because when you look at it, you'll find that there were Marxist agitators. There were agitators saying, the theory tells us, the theory of Karl and Friedrich and Vladimir tells us that we must now rise up. And that is why there was an uprising. So that's a long way of saying that a lot of work has been done to contrive out of inequality a problem where there was none. Now, you can have a big debate about apartheid and how it kept blacks poor and made whites rich. I do not think the problem there is the inequality that it caused. I think the problem there is the absolute destructive and inhumane poverty that it caused for black South Africans. And that is a problem that's easily solvable, really easily solvable, relatively quickly solvable. I think you need a generation and you solve it. That is something that can be done. But the solutions to poverty and the solutions to inequality are not only different institutions and phenomena, but more often than not, they act against each other. If you want to solve inequality, you can, but you're going to make poverty worse. And if you want to solve poverty, you can. But in many cases, not all cases, you are going to make inequality worse. And I think that's a gamble we should be very eager to take. That's a price we should be willing to pay.
Yeah, I also think that when they talk about the three great challenges in South Africa, poverty, unemployment, and inequality, I always think that people seem to think that those three are related to one another. But I mean, poverty and unemployment certainly. But the thing is, that's not really what they care about. They actually want to address inequality.
Yes.
And the thing is, you can address either inequality or you can address the other two, but you can't focus on all three. And I mean, just as a simple thought experiment, Martin, I'd like you to imagine that a genie has just visited us, and that genie has given me a button which I can press. And whenever I press this button, the income of every single South African doubles. Should I press it or not? Or would you press it? Because it seems obvious and everybody would say yes. Yeah. But what's the outcome of that? It means the guy who was worth 10 billion is now worth 20 billion. Yeah. The guy who was only worth 100K, he's only worth 200K now. That's an increase in inequality. Not that necessarily has to happen, but that's just to illustrate that clearly people are focusing on the inequality issue to the exclusion of the poverty issue. And that's what we've seen. And what we've actually seen is that we've gotten neither. We've gotten neither a more equal nor a richer society. South Africa is, in terms of inequality, sure, there has actually been a moderate decrease in the rate of inequality between population groups since '94, obviously. I mean, you open up the market, you allow people who were previously excluded to actually take part. Obviously, that's going to reduce inequality. But what we've also seen is that so within population groups, inequality has skyrocketed. Well, not within all groups, but within one group in particular. And that's within Black Africans, whereas the gap between whites and blacks in and of itself there is still definitely a gap. And I do think that there still are some issues which are not going to be solved very easily and which may require some sort of intervention. I don't really want to pretend as though that doesn't exist. But the fact is also that whereas within the black group, it might have looked something like this in '94, it's now that in 2025. So we're actually more unequal now than we were in '94. And but rather than that being driven in intergroup inequality, it's now far more of an intra-group or within a population group phenomenon. So we're more unequal, but we're more unequal because we've got a huge cadre of elites which are being benefited at the expense of just about everybody else. It's like I always say, it's under capitalism, you get the rich and the poor, but under socialism, you still get the rich and the poor. It's just that all the rich happen to be in government as well.
Yes. Yeah. No. So you mentioned two things that I think are important, and that is that to some degree, you get more equality when you just allow people to be free. I think that's something that tends to happen. It's not guaranteed, but that shows that that is a non-intervention that produces more equality, if you will. That is government saying, figure it out. We trust you to see to your own best interests. And then, of course, people are going to do the things that make them more wealthy. And then that kind of gap from absolute poverty to total rich, kind of complete wealth will lessen a little bit, at least from the bottom up. But the other thing is that when it comes to proactive interventions to address inequality, it must necessarily be an equality of relative poverty. The solution to inequality is redistribution. I mean, that's the toolkit. the toolkit of addressing inequality. There's various other tools to address poverty, but inequality is you take from the rich and you give to the poor. That is the mechanism of addressing inequality when you're kind of in politics. And the reality is, the reality is that you might give, when you do that, the poor a lifeline to kind of subsist, but that never amounts to empowering the poor to liberate themselves from poverty. It doesn't amount to giving them a job to work and grow in. It simply amounts to giving them a grant, to giving them some kind of basic income, which they are entitled to by virtue of being a legal subject rather than any work. So that mechanism makes the richer person kind of marginally, but somewhat poorer, and it does not make the poor any better off. And that's necessarily, if you're intervening in the market to bring about equality, you're necessarily bringing the rich down, and you might bring the poor up very slightly, but not in any sense that you'll find in a market economy. So any solution to inequality necessarily is one that pulls down rather than up. And any solution to poverty is necessarily, in my view, any real solution, kind of the ones that actually work to poverty, is one of allowing the downtrodden to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. A very American saying, but one that I think has a lot of merit, because when allowed to be prosperous, people tend to choose to be prosperous rather than choose to roll over and die. And in South Africa now, that allowance is absent. There is no kind of like, our employment laws and labor laws basically tell the poorest of the poor that you are not allowed to work. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And in that way, you exacerbate inequality, sure, but you absolutely keep people kind of destitute. And then you have these other mechanisms through which you address inequality, but necessarily just pull down those who have already escaped poverty. So these are two very different phenomena.
Yeah, no, but I think that even your portrayal of it is a bit charitable. I think it's not even the case that these policies, which are ostensibly intended to address inequality, do so at the expense of overall growth or overall wealth. I mean, that is sort of the theoretical notion behind it. And when I say the theoretical notion, I mean that's sometimes explicitly what some of the theorists say about this. Someone like Thomas Piketty, when writing about a wealth tax, he was asked about the fact that it seems as though the wealth tax doesn't do much to, it does a lot of harm to the economy, it does harm to the economy, and particularly to the based off in the economy, but it doesn't benefit the poorest. So there is no redistributive effect. And Piketty basically accepted that and said, no, he agrees, you're not going to get much tax revenue, and you are going to lose far more than you're going to generate in terms of revenue. But that's all right, because then you have taxed that wealth out of existence. And that's literally what his argument for a wealth tax. It's not that it's going to get revenue for the government, it's that you can tax wealth out of existence. So, but that's on the theoretical side. That's on you're going to make one set of people poorer in order to make another set of people maybe marginally better off. But in any case, to reduce the gap. But in fact, I mean, we've also looked at these stats, and we've seen that there is if there is any relation between relative degree of government interference and the overall levels of inequality, then it's in the other direction. Then it's that countries which have less interventionist governments tend to have the same levels of inequality, or in fact slightly lower levels of inequality than countries that have highly interventionist governments. So that's why I'm saying that it's not even the case that you're getting one at the expense of the other. It's far more the case that you're going to get neither. It's sort of like that. What is it? Is it the Franklin quote who says that if those willing to give up temporary, those willing to give up
those who are willing to give up liberty for temporary security will have neither, something along those lines.
Will have to content themselves with neither.
Yes.
And it really is the same thing. Those willing to give up growth in order to achieve equality will get neither growth nor equality.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's again not a theoretical argument. It's not even an argument about what happened in other countries. It's what's happening in this country.
Yes.
We're getting more inequality and we're getting less growth. So,
And isn't that what the World
on
Bank
their own
report
terms, it's
essentially
not
says?
working. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what the World Bank also says. Now, I must concede that there was a lot made about their statements regarding BEE. That really isn't a very big part of the report. I saw in the media, when the report was just released, it was, I was under the impression that this was just a huge hit job on a BEE. But having now read the report, that really isn't a very large emphasis. There really is a lot of other things that they emphasize far more, although they do address it. But it's again in that same way that we've sort of said about the DA. We sort of accept all the premises, but let's just find different means by which to achieve the same stated goal. Now, that's not to say that that's not that it isn't still a valuable way to investigate. I mean, their sort of argument about BEE is that let's just change the modalities of the system. Let's change the way in which we operate, because at the moment what you're doing isn't working. We know it, you know it, everybody knows it. But so here's a suggestion. Let's, instead of having these, and I've gotten the exact term now, it's the equity equivalent investment programs, or something similar. Instead of having that be the exception, let's make that the rule. Let's say that if foreign or local investors want to start a business, instead of having ownership as the default, but then providing, these carve-outs at your discretion every now and then for people to address BEE in another way by creating jobs or contributing to growth or contributing to infrastructure or anything like that. Let's have that be the norm. And I mean, people went mad. People went crazy that this program, which already exists in South Africa, and again, this program, which is already geared towards giving a broad-based, extra business, extraordinary course of business contribution to society, that this was apparently just completely unacceptable. And if that's where we are, then, I mean, how do we move forward?
It's religious. Yeah, it's a religious dedication to BEE, which is what the British have of the National Health Service. And I mean, that's you don't want to be there. Yeah,
it's a religious dedication not only to BEE but to this form of it.
Yes,
you can hardly even get people to a point where they'd be willing to say, okay, let's just change the way in which this operates.
Yeah.
So it's the goal of the policy is to have the policy. It's not as though this is, we do this because we want that, and the way we measure if this was a good idea is if we get that. It's we do this so that we do this, and therefore any suggestion that we not do it is a non-starter. And
it's the same with what Connie Mulder told Alec Hogg this week on the BizNews show. Essentially, that Solidarity is willing to accept kind of the notion of BEE, provided we're given kind of an answer of when is transformation complete. It's like we need to know what it is that we're working towards, what is the goal, and then we can actually evaluate whether we kind of achieve that goal or not. And if we don't, then we have to change tact. But the ANC, and certainly now the GNU, I mean, the GNU hasn't kind of clarified this any better, is resolute in refusing to give an answer of what is the ultimate goal. I mean, they say transformation and equity. That is not an answer. It's like it's a buzzword, and it does come down to what you just said. It is that no, this policy is part of the furniture forever. There is no goal. The goal is the policy. This BEE, the policy, is the imperative, not prosperity for Black South Africans, not participation in the economy. No. BEE is the goal, and I mean I think it's interesting that the World Bank, and I mean increasingly kind of leftist adjacent regimes, I would say, around the world also get this. They also get that, well, in our country, when the policy doesn't work, even though we're still committed to kind of redistribution and so on, we try something else. But the South Africans somehow uniquely think that you cannot change the logic of the policy. The only thing that they're willing to change, in which they are changing, is the level of how compulsory it is. You make it more compulsory. You never change the logic of the system or what you're trying to do. It's just, if it doesn't work, it means it's not compulsory enough, and therefore we're going to make it even more compulsory, which is utterly perverse.
Yeah, it really, and that's why I reference the analogy of an experiment kind of thing. You say that doing this will give you this outcome. You've done it, and you've gotten the opposite outcome. What do you do? And the answer is even more of that initial thing. And I mean the consequences of that are clear. But like you said, Martin, I do think that if there is one thing that does give me a little bit of hope, it's that it's quite clear that both domestically and now particularly internationally, there is a growing willingness to question these kinds of policies. And I mean, it's not as though the only bad policy in South Africa is BEE. There are plenty of bad policies. We could go a very long way towards spurring economic growth without touching BEE in particular.
Absolutely.
But I do think that if you could only change one single policy in order to get economic growth going, then that's probably the best one.
Yes.
But I mean, the only positive note for me would be that it seems as though these things which were completely outside of the Overton window to question are now, they're more up for debate than they were in the past. And it's sort of coincided with the general negativity towards the ANC itself, whereas a lot of people, particularly international people, felt, we're not really allowed to question it. It's Mandela's party. There's a growing willingness to do that. And I do think that that is positive. I do feel more optimistic now than I have in a very long time.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what I've also been saying to people asking about the Expropriation Act and Trump's intervention. And I think it's just indicative of a broader phenomenon that actually the environment is now more fluid, and it might cause some more pain, but the fluidity itself is a good thing, because these things weren't up for debate, and now at least they are. And I think that's a good point to end it on. Morné, thank you very much for the good chat. Thank you for helping me make myself guilty of treason in this conversation. I'm sure the complaints will be laid against us relatively soon, so that we can stand in solidarity with solidarity. Yeah, and thank you to everyone who joined us live. It's good to see that every week we are getting a nice number of people joining us live. It's still Sundays that we get our big growth spurt in the views department, and we want to say thank you to those viewers as well who use the Rational Standard as their weekend insight injection, I guess. We're very, very glad that you choose to spend that time listening to what we're discussing, and we really hope it does prove insightful for you. If so, please do like this video. Please do share it as well if you're so inclined. Above all, please do subscribe to this channel and click the notification button so that you can stay up to date with any new content that we produce. In the next while, we'll be saying a little bit more about what the next phase is for the Rational Standard, but no clear date on when that might be. But
it's
yeah,
be
again,
huge. It's going to be things are coming. Big, beautiful things are just around the corner. And I mean, it's some people are calling it, the biggest news maybe ever. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And at least since peanut butter, but yeah, it's gonna be big. So you have that to look forward to. But for now, I can only leave you with an invite to next week Friday's chat, same time, same place here on YouTube, Facebook, and I think we're not live on Twitter, but soon, hopefully. But yeah, please enjoy your weekends, and let's hope next week is a little less crazy, a little bit more productive, a little bit more conducive to freedom and harmony and all the nice things. Morné, thank you very much to our viewers.
Thanks, Marvin.
Cheerio.
Thanks to the viewers. Cheers, everyone.